Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm Devin Thorpe, your host, and our guest today is Francesca Story. Francesca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Devin, for working with me, the schedules, and doing all that we needed to do behind the scenes to make this happen. So I'm thrilled to be part of what you're doing.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. Well, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you help people.
Absolutely. So I am CEO of two enterprises that are closely related but separate. The first one is Startups for Social Impact, and my passion is really finding those entrepreneurs who want to fight disease and poverty, either with their gadgets and inventions or with their services, and to help them launch and grow. So I work with the early entrepreneurs, helping them do that and featuring them through Startups for Social Impact. And the goal there, similar to what you're doing, which is why I'm so excited to be here, is to form community and to have them come together, have that place where they can come together and do that. Now, Innovation Labs, which is kind of my bread and butter, is where I spend most of my time actually coaching and creating programs to help them go through the process of launching and growing. And so that's where Innovation Labs helps me get very technical about how to. One of the things that we do in Innovation Labs is also software development, whether it is apps that help increase productivity internally, or actually software that helps them either automate or improve a client experience in some way, whether the software is embedded in the device they're creating or the software is somehow part of the mechanism that allows them to carry their work further. So that's what I do.
Great, great. So tell me a little bit more about the social side of your business. Who are the people you're helping? Give us some idea of who's the right fit for your program.
Sure. So the right fit is someone, my background is in engineering. So let's start there. I'm an industrial engineer by trade. And so I am very much focused on production, gadgets, widgets, quality control, process control, cost reduction, automation. So anyone that is looking into making gadgets in one way or another, whether they're at the blueprint stage, they're still prototyping, they don't know how to go from concept to actual product, I would love to work with them. If they are already with the prototype in hand and they're testing it with real customers and trying to decide on production and which manufacturer do I go with, how do I find the manufacturer, those are the conversations that I love to have. And I find that if we set those pieces right, scaling is easier down the line. I do that in the context of coaching, so there's a lot of other pieces that fall into place as far as who your ideal client is and how you can best help them and how your solution is really going to make an impact so that marketing your product or service can really be effective. So it's in the context of really understanding your business model, not just isolated pieces. They all come together. So that's who I love. This is not my client, but it's kind of like my crush. I have a crush on them. I saw, for example, this TED Talk of this professor with his grad students. They were looking at ways in which they can make microscopes more affordable and actually accessible to people in third world countries. Particularly, I believe they were working on India. And they actually created a printable microscope that you can actually just print, assemble from paper. You can slide the glass in there, and voila, you have a microscope, and it costs about $2 to produce. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for.
That's exciting. Well, do you have a geographic focus?
I don't. And one of the reasons is obviously there's the bottom of the pyramid. There's 3 to 4 billion people living in less than $5 a day. About 2.7 billion living on less than $2 a day. But right here in the United States, 15% of the population is living below poverty. So geography is not as important as concept. I do follow Paul Polak's work a lot. He is founder of IDE, International Development Enterprises, and one of his tenets is extreme affordability. So for me, it's more, can you produce something that can be very affordable for those that need it? Design comes differently at that point. Where you get your raw materials is different. Can you produce it locally instead of in the United States? Or if it's in the United States to be consumed here, can it be produced here? So it's more looking at purpose rather than geography. And so I will work with anyone in, as far as geography is concerned, so long as they're serving that population.
That's great. Well, I want you to tell us a little bit, Francesca, a little bit about how you got interested in this. What brought you to this place?
Sure. I think everybody has a story, and so here's mine. And I was thinking about this the other day because I am revamping my website, and anyhow. So as I'm thinking of my story, I'm like, I grew up in a very affluent neighborhood in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. We were not wealthy. My grandfather came into land because he was an engineer, and so as payment, he got land in this neighborhood. He built a house, so we all move in, and I mean all. We all move into this house. I grow up surrounded by people who did grocery shopping in Puerto Rico. Like, who does that? Who goes to another country for groceries, right?
Yeah.
But we were so not that. And yet, 2 blocks away, we would walk to the bodega, is what we call them, el colmado. But it's like a mini grocery store, like a corner store. And the corner store was the entrance to the barrio, which is the in Brazil is favelas, or here would be the ghetto, right? But it's ghetto of a different kind. It's poverty like you don't see here in the U.S. unless you go looking for it. And I remember being there and thinking, I really am in between two worlds, even though I'm, this is home and this is my street. It's just one street, but I'm caught between two worlds. When I came to the States then, there was such a difference here when it came to social status. Here it was about race. And so here it's like, well, you're darker. And I'm like, well, I'm not poor. Does that count? But so being always caught in this place where I wasn't good enough. It didn't matter. Then other times it has been being a woman as an engineer. 25% of my college campus was female. And of that, I was the only Latina in most of my courses throughout the 4 years. So always feeling like the underdog in one way or another. And so I come to this point through different life experiences, being an entrepreneur, being technical, and not having believed the lies throughout, and coming to this point saying, well, what we need to do is just empower people. We need to allow them to get past those bumps so they can then carry out their purpose in life. Especially when it comes to economics, I think it can even be more oppressive than racism. I might get shot after saying that, but I think poverty in many ways can be poverty of the real kind, not relative poverty, but poverty of the real kind can be so pervasive and can just destroy generations. So for me, it's really where poverty is. That's where I want to see healing. That's where I want to see change. I've seen it firsthand, and I know what it is. I've seen it. So that's kind of how I got here.
It is interesting how classism can be as pernicious as racism, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it can be even more damaging in some ways. And granted, classism is related to racism. They're not separate.
Separate them very well, can you?
Yeah, they certainly are, and I think they're tools that are used to maintain both. So in some cases, racism reinforces classism. In some cases, classism reinforces the other. So they certainly go hand in hand. What I see about the difference, I find, racism in particular, I can ascribe it to some general group, right? Like all peoples of color, which then allows me to be the exception, right? So in the midst of all that, I can be different, and I can say, well, I don't have to adapt to that. That might be true for them, but it's not true for me. When you have no money and no way to produce money, it is about you. And then it flips, right? It's like everybody else can, but I can't, because you truly have no means to the end. And so I think that reality is altered in a more profound way when you don't have the means to get out of. I mean, I've seen people live in, literally, they dig holes and they put a hole in the ground, and then they'll put an aluminum top, and that's home. So we're talking about really not having anything. I always tell people, especially here in the States, when they're like, well, I'm poor. I'm like, you're not poor, you're broke. And that's very different.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been broke, but I'm not poor.
Your experience frames your perspective, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it does. Yes, it does. And in some cases, you're broke for a moment. And I think in this country, relatively speaking, that puts you in some sort of poor place for a minute. But when you have the means to get out of that situation, you're no longer living in poverty. You just broke for a minute. Whereas there are people who systematically live in conditions where even education is impossible. They're geographically disenfranchised from those methods and systems that can help them move forward. So it's just a very pervasive condition in some instances.
Well,
Sure.
I think that your perspective makes you an invaluable advisor, because you have seen up close and personal what it's like to be poor, and there are so many problems associated, quite frankly, with poverty. Right, that without that perspective, it's really difficult, I think, to be effective at times in lifting and helping people who are struggling with poverty.
Yeah, and we're not going to talk about the UN or about the International Monetary Fund or those great organizations that are trying. They might not be doing much. But the thing is that, to your point, I would encourage anyone who wants to be a social entrepreneur or whose goal in life is social impact to go ahead and take a trip. And not a pity trip to go and like, I was there, for 2 weeks, but rather with a very honest and sincere desire to experience what they experience. Because it does change how you go about wanting to help. In many cases, they have the solutions, they just can't make it happen. And so we go in at times, with this idea that we are going to teach them what they don't know. And the problem is not knowledge, is resources, right? And so going there to learn from them. I can give an example. For example, there was this lady came to our church, and she was raising funds because she wanted to put toilets into this community that was living kind of in the woods outside of Santo Domingo. And my first thought was, well, what if the toilet breaks down? Who is going to fix it? There was no answer to that question. Because she had not thought about what it means to live in that circumstance. She's thinking they need toilets, and I'm here thinking they need better latrines, and not because they're subhuman or something, but because that's what they can truly maintain. And I'm not sure that they were asking for plumbing.
Yeah.
And we want to get them there perhaps, but it's more like disease control. How do you help them live in their circumstances with more dignity? How do you help them do what they want to do, not what you want to do? Another thing that I think of is that a lot of times we think of ourselves, and I speak as an American, but we think of ourselves as the standard, right? Like what people want is to live like us. Well, that's not the case either. In many instances, they want to live like they want to live. They just want to do it better, whatever that means to them. And so it's enabling that and being a part of their journey and being a catalyst to them creating the future that they want for themselves.
Yeah. Well, Francesca, tell us how people can get in touch with you if they would like to have your help or otherwise connect with you. What's the best way for people to reach you?
The best way is my email, which is Francesca at myinnovationlabs.com. francescasstory.com, but Twitter, and my Twitter handle is listed right here, somewhere here. You can reach me there. I'm on Twitter all the time, and it's a quick way to connect. You can shoot me a direct message or share a phone number, and we'll make that transition right away.
So for people who are listening to the podcast, what's your Twitter handle?
It's Wow Francesca, Wow in Spanish, WAO, FRAN as in Nancy, CES as in Sam, CA. Wow Francesca.
Fantastic. Well, again, Francesca, thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Devin. You're awesome. Your work is great, so thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now let's do some good.
Yes.